As you're probably aware by now, Natural Resources Wales have put out a consultation about potentially regulating the release of game birds in Wales. This is a bit of a problem for many reasons we're going to get into. But if you're a shooter or a country person or a gamekeeper or involved in this community in any way, it is vital that you fill out the form, which is what I'm going to do today, aided by Tim Weston of the National Gamekeepers Organisation.
Natural Resources Wales have put a consultation together for the release of game birds in Wales because the Welsh Government have instructed them to look at what they're calling the problem of game bird release. They say that has the potential for environmental damage by releasing game birds, and they want to address that by having control over how many, where they're licensed, and who is releasing those birds. As we'll go on when Johnny fills out the consultation paper, and we'll go through there's only about 4 questions that you need to respond to. As we go through those, we'll talk through some ideas about why we don't agree with licensing, if we don't agree with licensing, and what the effects to our community of effectively restricting a currently legal healthy activity would be.
This consultation closes on June the 20th. There is a little bit of time to do it, but as with all things, get it done now before it's too late. Otherwise it'll be June 21st before you know it. Question 1 is quite simple. What is your name? Input your full name. What is your email address? Input your full email address. One that you actually know the password to would be preferable. Number 3, if you're representing an organisation, please tell us which one. Is that suitable only for people like the NGO, BASC, or is this suitable for companies?
It's suitable for companies as well. If you're responding just as yourself, leave that question blank. But Johnny, I'd suggest you're going to respond for TGS Outdoors, for example.
I would hope so, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to write this as a business.
There you go, page 2. Do you agree that the common pheasant and red-legged partridge should be added to Part 1 of Schedule 9 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 in Wales? This change would mean that releasing those species in Wales would need to be carried out under a licence. Please give reasons for your views.
Okay, so let's just break the question down into several parts. So the first thing I'd say about this particular question, and many of the questions we'll come on to, is they don't really give you an option to disagree with them. That's
quite clear, and it requires you to understand what Part 1 of Schedule 9 of the Wildlife of WACA 1981 would be.
Absolutely, and oversitting the consultation survey is a series of documents which total about 400 pages. But effectively, what Part 1, Schedule 9 of the Countryside, Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 in Wales says is it would list common pheasants, which we're going to call pheasants from now on, shall we?
Yeah.
It would list pheasants and red-legged partridge, which I think we'll call partridge from now on.
Just as a quick aside, this isn't going to include grey or English partridge.
No, or ducks.
Interesting.
So it is literally common pheasants and French or red-legged partridge. So Part 1, Schedule 9 lists the non-native invasive species in Wales. So really good examples: grey squirrel, muntjac deer.
Mink
would be on those. What that means is if that animal is captive, it would be illegal to release it.
Without a licence to do so.
Without a licence to do so. So, for example, you catch a grey squirrel in a live catch trap, it's illegal for you to release it back into the countryside. You have to dispose of it or apply for a licence to release it. So pheasants and partridges would come under that same piece of legislation.
Okay.
So the first part of the answer is, do you agree that they should go on to that part of the Act?
So the first part of this answer should be, no, I do not agree.
Absolutely. That's the first part, and that's the NGO suggestion is, first part, no, we do not agree they should be put onto that part of the Countryside and Wildlife Act.
And we are not agreeing because?
So that's quite a complicated issue. So the licensing that NRW are looking at follows some best practice recommendations, and it's effectively what they're saying, and I'm going to paraphrase because we'll be here for ages otherwise, but it's 1,000 pheasants per hectare of release pen and 1,000 partridges per 2 hectares or hectare of game cover crops. And we'll come on to a specific partridge question later. So what they're saying is, if you are within, you've got a 2 hectare pheasant pen and you put down 1,000 pheasants, you can operate under a general licence, which they'll issue every year. So you don't need to apply for a licence. But if you put 1,001 in that pen, you'll need to apply for a licence from Natural Resources Wales. Now, the other issue with a general licence is that's only a 12-month licence. And at any point, the Welsh Government can restrict, revoke, change or remove.
Just look what happened 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've also got to bear in mind, we've got a government in Wales that has openly written to the shooting organisations, and Julie James was the Environment Minister at the time, and said that they do not support game shooting and live quarry shooting in Wales for a leisure activity. So we've got a partisan government who are trying to licence a currently legal activity. To create the licence, they have to make that activity illegal. So there's a lot of pitfalls here. So things from a TGS point of view that I would consider if I were writing your consultation. So we've already decided we don't agree.
With the basic principle of the question.
We don't agree. And then they should give you reasons why.
Well, you could write a lot of reasons, but I'm presuming they're not looking for an essay, seeing as there are 5 more questions thereafter.
Well, that actually, interestingly, is entirely up to you. And the more you write that's considered and valid, it all has to be read. So if you just write, no, I don't agree, good enough, okay? And that's going to take them 3 seconds to read that.
Yeah.
If you write a more lengthy answer that's considered and valid, it's no good writing nonsense. They have to read it. They have to read all of it from every respondent. So I would probably want to put something fuller in. So, for example, the NGO have sat back and we've thought about some of the consequences of a licensing system. And we feel that one of the big ones is all around conservation. So one of the reasons Natural Resources Wales are doing this is they're saying they have a legal obligation to, and the Welsh Government, to protect the Welsh environment.
Okay.
Right? So if you are a Welsh shooting business and you're investing in additional conservation work, you're doing hedge management, tree management, woodland management, repairing dry stone walls, so on and so forth, planting new trees, putting in scrubland, all the good conservation work we do, and you're investing additional money into that part of your business, but the licence could be revoked any time within the next 12 months. Are you going to go above and beyond?
Unlikely. I think that for me, the answer to question 4 is exactly that. You're putting barriers in place.
Yeah.
And knowing what farmers who own these properties, landowners, gamekeepers are like, their time for admin and their time is already very stretched. Asking them to go and do something else that will potentially be quite time consuming, as every license application seems to be for everything else, isn't going to be something they're going to want to do.
No, I don't think they will. So that's one really, really valid point. Another one would be the NRW might say, well, if they're putting under 1,000 birds per hectare of pheasant pen, they won't need to apply for a licence because it'll be there. But I don't believe that they're going to go the extra mile and invest in the additional conservation work. Would you invest in your business if it could potentially stop in 12 months' time?
I think
you'll run it.
Just from a very basic standpoint, if you release a few more pheasants, you generally have more covers. You need more covers. You need better landscape to hold those pheasants. If you release less, you can get away with less covers and a slightly less good landscape.
Yeah.
It's quite a simple recipe, isn't it?
Yeah. So we believe by licensing game shooting Wales, there'll be a negative conservation impact, which is not what they want to achieve.
Cool. I'm going to fill this out later, or else I'm going to sit here typing, since I'm not 200 word a minute typing.
So, but there are other things to consider in that question. So, Johnny, I've watched your videos, and you can shoot a clay pigeon now and again. But I've also seen you shoot a game bird, and we've actually shot together in North Wales.
We have.
Now, if licensing was brought in and it could be removed at any point, would you take the plunge in February and book your shooting in Wales?
It's a good question. And if you flip that round, imagine running that business with the looming threat of them saying, no at any point.
Absolutely.
The mental health ramifications there,
Yeah.
let alone the pressures of it being a good business decision.
Yeah.
It really bears.
Yeah. So things to fill out that question I'd consider environmental consequences, probably a negative impact, is the NGO is suggesting. We're suggesting that it'll impact the customer confidence, it's called. So if you're thinking about going to enjoy shooting in Wales with a Welsh business, are you going to make that commitment with the threat of a licence looming over that business, which could be ended? We'd also want to look at the social impact of people who are involved in shooting in Wales. And in North Wales, rural North Wales, it's a massive part of people's livelihoods in the winter and their social interaction. So that's something else you might want to consider. One of the other things that you might want to consider, if you are Welsh and a Welsh speaker, I've noticed, and you certainly noticed because we talked about it when we were shooting in Wales, that most of the beaters spoke to each other in Welsh. Okay, so that's one of the only places that they're going to get together en masse, other than probably the livestock market, to speak to each other in Welsh for a whole day, enjoying the Welsh countryside. So these are all really important things that licensing genuinely will affect.
And even if not 100%, it will diminish it by a certain amount, which is unacceptable from our standpoint.
And actually, we believe illegal because the Welsh Government have a duty to protect the Welsh language. The question's not, we can't give you an answer for every individual, but we can talk to you about thinking about things that might affect it. So certainly conservation, certainly social mobility, certainly Welsh language. And from a business perspective, it's going to limit your opportunities. And equally, if customer confidence isn't there, and you're holding off on booking your day shooting in North Wales just in case, you're not going to book the hotel, and you're not going to put the meal in the pub, and you're not going to go and visit the shop for 11s. And there is a huge knock-on effect economically as well as environmentally.
This is able to be entered by anyone in the United Kingdom, or can foreign nationals enter as well?
The NRW have stated that anyone in the world is able to respond to this consultation.
So if you are an American who goes shooting in Wales, fill out the form.
Please respond.
Question 5. If these species are added to Schedule 9, please give us your views on whether our proposed licensing approach would be effective and proportionate. I mean, my instinct is to say no, but they're not giving you an option to say no.
No, they don't. It's a very leading question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what they're saying here is, if these species, they might as well have written when these species, mightn't they?
Yes.
Well, the way they've read the. So what's your thoughts, John? What do you think?
My first sentence is, I do not believe this licensing system is necessary.
Yeah, and that's how the NGO have answered that question. We don't believe the licensing is necessary. Would it be effective? Well, we believe it would be effective in, as we said in the previous question, in increasing the decline in environmental impacts. So because there won't be the extra conservation work being done by gamekeepers, we believe that it won't be effective in what they want to achieve. So we think it'll have the adverse effect to what they want to achieve. There'll be less flora, less fauna.
Very likely.
Yeah.
Because if you own land, it needs to be doing something for you.
Absolutely.
Inherently. And if you put sheep on it, that's going to be less biodiverse than if it's left as a pheasant cover.
Yeah, quite right. And the other thing that we got to look at, will it be proportionate? What do you think about that? Is it a proportionate?
Proportionate to what? It's probably overly proportionate, isn't it? If you want to think about the measures to the problem, as they like to call it.
Yeah.
It's overly proportionate. It's too much of a response to what the problem is that they consider to be a problem.
Yeah, and also given the fact that there's no actual research that says there is a problem. So it's not proportionate in several ways. We think it's disproportionate in the impact it could have on the Welsh rural economy. You know, it could have a negative impact, or will have a negative impact. And also, it can't be proportionate because they need to do more research. So potentially in 4 years, 5 years down the line, when that research has been done, this consultation would be valid. But right now, we don't believe it is.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because they're going on their gut instinct / political push and political feeling over actually any science.
Yeah. And if you read the full consultation paper, they actually do state in there that game shooting has environmental benefits to the Welsh countryside. And they say they don't know what the damage is, so they can't. So can it be proportionate? I don't believe it can be.
So perhaps the wiser thing, instead of this entire proposed licensing system, would be for them to invest in a 5-year study to see whether it's even a necessary thing, which it probably isn't. But I'm presuming they don't want to invest in a 5-year study to see whether this is actually a good idea for the long-term benefits or effects on the Welsh countryside and economy.
No, because they've also stated they want this to come in for the 23-24 season, which is next year.
Okay.
So
That's...
But again, your answers don't need to be massive. 2 sentences is
Yes.
it's great. That's all you need to write. But you do need to put something.
So you could say it's got a disproportionately negative effect on the economy, the environment, whatever you feel is the biggest benefit or the biggest impact to you.
Absolutely. And if you genuinely think, I mean, you think back to COVID in Wales, they shut Wales down twice, and they shut it down for the longest period of all the British nations. Now, was that proportionate or disproportionate? I'd imagine many Welsh people or people living in Wales would have thought that was disproportionate because the rest of the country managed perfectly well. So again, you can make that point that, I lived through COVID in England and we found that what you did was disproportionate. That's what you're planning on doing here. Or I lived through COVID in Wales where you shut the countryside down and Welsh people's mental health has been affected by that. And potentially this will have the same mental health effects to Welsh people living in the rural areas, which is a far greater landmass of Wales than the urban centres.
All right. I'm happy with that. I've only done 2 sentences, but I think it was enough.
Absolutely.
That got my point across.
Absolutely. The question 4 is the most wordy one.
Yes. All right. Click on to the next page, and we have question 6. We have based the proposed general licence conditions for pheasant release on the recommendations in the GWCT guidelines for sustainable game bird releasing. However, the guidelines do not include specific density thresholds for red-legged partridge, and there appears to be less evidence on which to base conditions relating to partridge. We have used what evidence is available and expert opinion to propose conditions for partridge releases. These are either based on density threshold linked to the area of cover crop provided or on density per hectare of release pen, as with pheasants, depending on how the birds are released. We would welcome views on whether these proposals are appropriate and workable and whether they could be improved. I mean, my gut thing is, did they consult you, the GWCT or BASC for their expert opinion?
So, not on this specific question, but 6 months ago, they did do what's called a closed consultation with stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So asking for our opinions on a licensing system and what effects they could have, but we didn't get these exact questions. So the quick answer is no, we were not asked about this. So things jumped out to the NGO is one of the points we would like to make is game cover isn't the be-all and end-all to releasing partridge. A lot of North Wales is scrubland, which is ideal.
Perfect partridge habitat, big brackeny banks,
absolutely.
Lots of gorse.
Yeah, and the way the birds are, they don't cause lots of damage. They're not big scratches like pheasants. They're not. So there's, and they even say in the question themselves that there's little evidence.
So is this just asking for people's opinion?
Well, experts' opinion, it says so. It says experts' opinion. So some of the things the NGO have asked in our response is we said, who are these experts? We don't know them. Who are they? Let us know who the experts are. And we've also said that without scientific data to back up these experts' opinion, it has the same weight as anybody else. An expert with an opinion with no evidence is just an opinion.
I remember a long time ago when we made our first film with you guys, with Rob Mars, he said, I'm a scientist, I don't care about the outcome, I care about finding out what the outcome is.
Yes, yeah. That's absolutely what we're responding, the NGO responding. So there isn't enough research, more needs to be done, you can't make a definition up. And I think we've also said we're experts in the field and you haven't asked us.
Yeah.
So you may be able to help, you may have a partridge shoot at home, and you may be able to show the net benefit of releasing partridges on your farm or your estate, and write it down.
Yeah.
You know, so again, it's a very leading question. They're not actually asking you for an answer. They're asking for how we could improve the proposal, but we're saying the proposal shouldn't be there in the first place.
Question 7. The GWCT guidelines include a recommendation that no more than 1/3 of woodland with game interest should be used for release pens. This is to ensure sufficient woodland remains that can benefit from habitat management activities. We would like to include this recommendation in our proposed general license. However, we would prefer to be able to define what can be included in the calculation. Do you have any suggestions for how this might be achieved? So these two questions are just asking for what do you think, guys? Inherently, sufficient woodland remains that can benefit from habitat management activities. For anyone who's ever been in a release pen, habitat management happens in release pens.
Yeah, that's one of the extraordinary things about it. But what we've got to remember is what the science shows is that if there is going to be any damage, it will be done in the pen. Mm-hmm. So then the conservation work that goes on outside the pen, in addition to the pen, but goes on outside the pen, mitigates that damage. That's what we're saying. But if there's a license in place that you could be stopped from shooting, your business or your sport can be stopped at any point, are you going to continue to do that external management? Are you going to bother doing the woodland management that you would do?
Are you going to be planting woodlands with a 30, 40, 50 year plan ahead of you?
Yeah, absolutely. And are you going to be managing the ancient woodland you've got? Are you going to be coppicing? Are you going to be doing the rides? Are you going to be opening the canopy up? All the things that game management activities do, we believe that would reduce massively or stop.
Yeah.
So in any calculation, again, I think the answer should be this should not be implemented. That should be the answer to every question. No, you should not do this. But how are they going to calculate the woodland? Do you take... It's a really complex issue. So let's take a North Wales shooting estate, or any size of shoot. Mm-hmm. And you've got big release pen, few birds in it, in a 2,000-acre cycler spruce plantation.
Which is pretty worthless.
Absolutely,
as a conservation.
No conservation value whatsoever. And then we've got on the other side of the valley, we've got semi-ancient natural woodland, so oak, birch, probably some withy down in the bottoms by the river. And you've got a big release pen with few pheasants in it, and you do some conservation work, you do some coppicing with the hazel, you do some... Which one's got... And that might only be 100 acres. Which one's higher conservation value? So it's a very difficult question.
It all boils down to the basic principle here, is that the GWCT guidelines are guidelines.
Yes.
Every shoot, every piece of ground, depending what the soil's like, depending what everything else is like, requires such an intimate knowledge of how it goes on to know how it affects. You can't be like, all right, this is a shoot in South Wales, let's study this. Okay, there's a shoot in North Wales, and now I'm going to implement the same data. Yeah. It just can't work like that.
Absolutely, and that's why more research needs to be done. But I think you can, right? Look, I don't know. I don't think this should be implemented because we don't know. If that's what you want to write, if you do know and you can put some examples in, that's even better.
Question 8. Location and density appear to be the main factors influencing the environmental impact of release. But we recognise that smaller releases in less sensitive areas are likely to present reduced risks. It may be appropriate that small game bird releases taking place away from sensitive protected sites and their buffer zones are not subject to the same general licence conditions that apply to larger releases. Do you think that this is something that we should consider? Please give reasons. I mean, that's, again, an extremely open question. It doesn't really say a lot. Again, my gut says... What is the difference between a small release of 1,000 birds on 100 acres and a large release of 100,000 birds on 100,000 acres?
Yeah, absolutely right. And what they're actually saying, if you read the question, you've got to read it twice. So if you read the question twice, they're not saying small shoots shouldn't have a licence. They're saying small shoots will have a different general licence. Yes. So
be under different conditions.
Under different conditions, okay? So a lot of people have read that question that if you're a small shoot, don't worry, you won't be licensed, it'll be fine, you crack on, you carry on you. That's not what the Welsh Government are saying. They're saying we're going to ban the release of game birds, because to create a licence you have to ban it, so all the shoots will be licensed. So a lot of people have misread that question.
Okay.
So what they're talking about is a tiered licensing system. So Fred can do this, but Dave can do that. And that fundamentally makes it much harder to control the other parts of the licence that they're trying to implement, and creates bureaucracy. So it's creating a lot of different issues. And again, the point you made in the previous question, Johnny, about habitats and work, and one of the points the NGO have made in response to this question is, actually that's not necessarily true, because an estate with 3 or 4 full-time gamekeepers and releasing a lot of birds are probably doing a lot more conservation work than a walk one, stand one shoot where they have 4 work parties a year. Now, we're not saying that one's better than the other.
But the potential net gain to biodiversity is likely to be higher on a professionally run shoot.
Quite possibly.
And where, more importantly, a shoot where there is a bit of spare cash, because they're running it to a financially profitable standard, is more than likely going to reinvest some of that cash back into the land that they're doing it with.
Absolutely, and the farmers are farm diversification as well. They're getting a larger rent, and that's all helping. So there's lots of different reasons. So again, it's a very leading question, isn't it? It's written to make you agree with them, which makes you quasi agree that there should be a licensing system.
So I've entered the first thing is I do not believe a licensing system is necessary, and then I will give my reasons as to why I think this question perhaps is flawed.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. And if we could get one of the key things we've got to get through to everyone that shoots in the UK, outside the UK, goes beating, has anything to do with this community, you own a B&B, is we've got to get you to respond to this consultation. It's so important. Weight of numbers count, and weight of numbers also count against us. So by not responding, that will count against our community. Yes. So every single one of us, and
nothing to be lost by putting in a very basic response.
Absolutely. And the NGO would like a more thought through, considered response. But there's help from all the organisations there. So BSC have got some really good help on their website with some relatively basic responses you can put in, and that's worth looking at if you don't have the time or the inclination to put in a larger, more considered one. Countryside Alliance have put together a letter that will automatically be sent to the Welsh ministers. I would urge you all to do that as well, and all your family members too. This needs to be an electronic march on Cardiff to start with.
Welsh language considerations. Our Welsh culture, heritage and language are important to us as an organisation. As a public organisation in Wales, we have a legal duty to ensure that the Welsh language is treated equally to the English language in all aspects of our work. As part of this consultation, we would like your opinion on whether you believe the proposals could in any way affect opportunities for people to use the Welsh language. Number 9. Could the proposals affect opportunities for people to use the Welsh language? As we said earlier...
We've already spoken about it. Clearly, yes.
Yeah, I've shot in Wales last year, and I felt odd not knowing what people were saying. Yeah. Because it's just a really commonplace thing, I presume, for these people just to speak Welsh to each other, which is awesome for an opportunity.
Absolutely, and it's also it's where you get a group of rural people together, and the Welsh language is predominantly spoken in the rural areas. So there's not many times in Wales, which is a really remote country. You know, it's not like England where we're all living jowl by cheek. It's a remote country, and people to get together is important, and then to be able to speak the Welsh language to each other in a natural environment where that language comes naturally to the speaker is really important. So the NGO believe that by restricting, which this will restrict shooting opportunities, will genuinely restrict the use of the Welsh language. And the other thing that's important about shooting sports that is so unlike any other social activity or sporting activity is you have very old and very young people doing the same activity at the same time.
On the same level.
The same level, which is really rare. You think about most sporting social interactions are generally a ball sport, where you are split into age groups and you're split into sexes. That doesn't happen in shooting. So it genuinely is important that the older generation can pass knowledge down to the young generation.
It's a community gathering
Absolutely.
when people get together to shoot.
Yes.
So it will break up those communities, or at least certainly what I've put is it will restrict the opportunities for communities to gather.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we go down to the pub and so on and so forth, but that's perhaps less of a healthy gathering than
Of
beating.
course it is. Yeah. So I think that is a genuine concern, and it'd be really interesting if some Welsh speakers could respond to that with their genuine views. And I think that's question 9 is quite an important question, quite an important part of the.
It's certainly the most easy to answer so far. Because it's a very direct question.
It's a direct question. It's the only question to ask you a question, actually.
Number 10. Is there a way we can increase the use of Welsh or provide more opportunities for people to use the Welsh language? I mean, it seems an odd question in a shooting consultation
It does.
paper, but I presume it's a lead on from question 9.
It is, and in all Welsh government consultations, these questions are all in all of them.
These are completely standard.
So they're standard questions. You do not need to answer all the questions in the consultation. So even if you wanted to leave out question 5, you can leave it out.
Okay. I don't feel particularly qualified to answer question 10.
So from an NGO's point of view, we've asked some Welsh gamekeepers who are first language Welsh speakers for the advice. So we filled it in with their advice. But as an individual, if you're not a Welsh speaker, you may not feel qualified to answer the question, so leave it blank.
11. Are there any aspects of the proposal that could disadvantage people in using the Welsh language? Again, we're going back to yes, because of the community aspects. It's much the same question as 9.
It is, but I think there's something slightly deeper in this one. Mm-hmm. So genuinely, when this was announced, the NGO were contacted by a number of Welsh gamekeepers. And when I say Welsh gamekeepers, I mean Welsh nationals who are gamekeepers in Wales.
Because they'd have to move.
And they've already asked us to try and help them find jobs in England for job security. Right, so these are people who've grown up in Wales, they speak Welsh, their families speak Welsh, their families live in Wales. So they're now thinking, gosh, the government don't support me, I'm going to have to move to a different nation in the United Kingdom to carry on my career and look after my family. So yes, could it disadvantage people for using the Welsh language? Yes, because they're going to have to move to a country that they speak it. So I think it's actually more serious than initially looking at the question.
Yeah. And those people involved in full-time employment will have to leave their home community, their home nation, the country that speaks their language.
Yes.
Awkward. Well, it's just awful, actually, when you think about it like that.
No, and their families and their children who've been learning well. It is serious. All for a licensing system that they want to implement that will almost certainly also have a negative environmental impact. So they're asking for an economic negative, an environmental negative, and a Welsh language negative. Frankly, this system is lose-lose.
Number 12. Do you believe the proposals treats the Welsh language less favourably than the English language?
So the proposals themselves probably don't. The actual proposal.
Yes.
But the result of what will happen to the proposal will. So you could write that. Maybe just write the results of the proposal almost certainly will. For the reasons we discussed in question 11.
Almost done. You're about to submit your response. By clicking Submit Response, you give us permission to analyse and include your response in our results. After you click Submit, you will no longer be able to go back and change any of your answers. One presumes you can only enter one response.
You should only enter one response, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
When you submit your response, you'll be sent a receipt and a link to a PDF copy of your response. I would say to most people, certainly from my perspective, this isn't a spelling test, this isn't a grammar test, this is nothing to do with your ability to write beautifully. This is a simple thing to fill out. I'm not the best writer in the world, but the answers are what they need to be. Well, the answers are the truth, and they don't need to be beautiful prose to be correct. So don't feel bad that your spelling, your grammar might not be up to scratch, because mine's awful. Just get it filled out, get it done. Guys, thank you very much for watching. It's important, I think, at this stage to re-emphasise how important filling out this is if game bird released in Wales gets licensed, this is a very slippery slope, certainly for Welsh game shooting and potentially game shooting in the rest of the UK.
This is probably the single largest attack we've had on game shooting in one of our nations ever. And apathy can't be accepted in this. We all need to have our voices counted individually as well as organisations. And by my personal view is by not responding, by not getting behind the campaign, by not letting the Welsh Government know your feelings, you are as compliant in having a licensing system enforced on us as those that want it done. So everybody that shoots in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the rest of the world, please get behind the campaign.